figure I should start off my first video, especially it being this long, with a bang. So, did you ever know that the word laugh originated as the word law, in the sense of like law and order and all that? And then tale, of course, we know it means lie, but it also means to lure or roast something. Speaking of lie, I think everyone knows Elbaf backwards is fable, which also means to lie. But did you know that the word raft originally meant trap? And tell is another word for lie? So with that, my name is Adam Jinrakai, and let's get into this video dissecting everything wrong with Binks Sake, and how it's actually the biggest trick that Oda has ever pulled. Now, I'm not trying to make this video to talk crap about anyone in particular, or disparage anyone from theory crafting. I just personally, I have some kind of huge issues that I feel like should be glaringly obvious to everyone watching, but it does not seem to be. But it's kind of turned into this theory or idea that we're not even allowed to discuss anymore. It's almost de facto set in stone that Binks Sake is the answer to everything. And I am hoping to kind of, I guess, poke some huge holes into that theory with this video. And hopefully, I'm hoping, kind of change the direction of the entire conversation around One Piece that people have been having for over 30 years now.
Ike, that's the wrong number!
And honestly, I never really felt like I had anything to kind of say or add to the One Piece community in any major way until the last couple years or so. Really going back and rereading and studying the story more and talking to more and more people and meeting so many new friends and getting their perspectives in the story and all this stuff. It's almost been like training to just learn, you know, more about One Piece, this story that I love so much, and that's all I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to really, you know, be contrarian or anything for clickbaits or anything like that. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm finding and a lot of what the clues are leading me to, I really hope is not what happens. And we'll get to some of that in this video. But please, just all I ask is, you know, if you could keep an open mind and give the video a chance. If you like it, please, you know, help me out and like and subscribe and share it and all that stuff you're supposed to say. But if you don't like it, you know, please comment, because, you know, I'd love to hear, you know, what you think, and, you know, if it changes my mind or not. That's all we're just trying to do here. Just keep an open mind and see if we can change them. So with that, my name is Adam Jinrakai, and let's get started on Binks Brew. I mean Binks Booze. I guess it's Binks Sake. I'm not really sure what I should call it, which kind of to me is like the first big problem. Number 1, the name of that song. Now, I say that kind of half jokingly. I think that all of the scanlations, translations, official translations, anime translations, all of them have various different clues in the words and the letters used. And I think part of the One Piece, to me, is kind of combining all of various interpretations and translations, and that all together they're clues. And we'll get to a lot of that in this video, because you will be really shocked with just some simple, easy ones, like the sound effects when Brook's playing the piano in his flashback when everyone's dying. But first, let's just start on the word sake. Now, I am aware that sake is an alcoholic beverage from Japan. It's the national drink of Japan, and it's made with rice. I understand all that, and it really wouldn't stick out to me that much if everywhere in the manga, for the most part, especially chapter 1, if Oda didn't constantly write out in English the word beer. And honestly, since he uses the word beer so much for booze in the story, let's look at the word sake just for a second as sake. Because actually, there's a quote from the Bible that it reminds me of that might be pretty relevant to the One Piece story. But we'll get to that. First, let's just look at what the word sake means in English. And I know that the One Piece is written in Japanese and that Ichiro Oda speaks and writes Japanese. I understand all that stuff. But since he uses so many English words and draws in the actual manga panels, the English letters and stuff like that. And considering that the One Piece logo has always been written mainly in English, and that, you know, English is the most spoken and written language in the world, let's just kind of go with that idea that maybe the English letters and symbols might have some clues in them. And we'll get to the kanji and stuff like that too shortly. But I think starting here is really going to give us a good glimpse of how much Oda uses these words to really spell out clues to the entire story. And he has been doing it since, you know, before the story started. He's been doing it since that wanted collection of one-shots that he has. But we're going to have to get to that in a future video. Okay, so sake comes from the Old English word saku, which means cause, lawsuit, legal action, complaint, issue, or dispute. It also means crime or sin. Now, it also comes from an old Proto-Germanic word, sako, which means quarrel or charge, and they're all from the Proto-Indo-European word segju, I have no idea how to say that, meaning to seek out, and a bunch of the old words meaning cause, matter of business, dispute, argument, and earlier words relating to seek or to ask, which will be important later. Now, you'll probably notice that each of these old words, they either sound like sag, sack, or bag in some way. But back to sake, the English definition of sake has four main definitions: cause, interest or account, a purpose or end or reason, the benefit or regard of something or someone, and the last one, which is obsolete, except they use it in the Bible, which we're about to get to, which means contention, strife, guilt, sin, accusation, or charge. And obviously, for the most part in the United States, sake is used in terms of when you say something like, for goodness sake, stuff like that. Now, I've never really been to church or anything like that, or gotten religious training or anything like that. This is just all, you know, my personal opinions and stuff I've learned from various people and reading online and doing my own research. You know, that's going to be a big emphasis of this channel is, you know, this is, you know, hopefully a starting point for you to look into a lot of this stuff yourself, because a lot of the clues in the One Piece story seem to kind of lead you down some crazy, you know, learn about this scientific discovery or this mathematical equation or this weird thing, and it doesn't quite make sense how it all ties together, and then suddenly after, you know, reading, you know, 10 books on this subject, it suddenly clicks that, oh, you know, he was meaning this the whole time. You know, at least I think. But so back to the Bible quote. This is basically the moment where Adam and Eve are kicked out of paradise for, you know, eating the fruit of the tree of evil or tree of knowledge or tree of good of evil, whatever they call it. When they get kicked out of, you know, paradise, and because of that, their new sake, their new reason and all this stuff, their living will be a struggle, and that the land will be hard to grow from, and you will have to do this for all your days, and that life is going to be more of a struggle now than it was in paradise. Now, I'm not, you know, trying to say anything about what I think about any of this, or the Bible, or any of those things. It's the most best-selling book of all time, and I personally think that part of the Oda's idea, not Luffy's idea, but Oda's idea of what the Pirate King is, you know, his version of the All Blue, which is a stew of combining every reference of everything ever into one huge story. Just this quote, to me, brings to mind Luffy eating the fruit in chapter 1, Roger starring off all the stuff, you know, the sin of pirating on page 1, all that stuff. This quote really, to me, reminds me a lot of it, to such a degree that it was kind of the start for me of questioning the Binks Brew, the Binks Sake narrative. Let's drop sake for a second. Let's look at the English translations, because the anime uses booze and the manga uses brew, and I think that those might be way more accurate to what Oda is planning. Of course, sake being a brewed alcoholic drink fits what we're going to be talking about too. But let's take a look at the English translations of Binks Brew or Binks Booze. God, those are all hard to say. They're all super hard to say. It's very hard to sing those words together when you try to sing it out loud in English, which I think is also a clue. But I don't want to sound too, you know, out there. But at the same time, what do I care? I'm all the way out here alone on an island. So, you know, I'm used to it. Now, Viz uses the translation of Binks Brew, and the Crunchyroll subs use the translation of Binks Booze. So let's start with what brew means. And now when it doesn't mean eyebrow, it basically means to cook something with heat. You know, to boil. And the earliest words for it all kind of mean to brew, but the Middle English version of it, brewin, has some notable differences, especially considering what we looked at the definition of sake before. Of course it means to brew, but it also means to induce or cause something, a condition or effect, and to unfold or begin, to start something. So we got brew mean, to cook something, but we also have it tying back into sake with the idea of causing or starting something. And then when we get into Crunchyroll's interpretation of the title of the song, we get booze, which of course is any alcoholic beverage, but it's also, a drinking party. And all of that word starts from the alteration from the word bows. And that's drinking heavily again with the same meaning, but it comes from a High German word busen, meaning to swell or inblow. Looking at the definitions of the word, of course, means to party and stuff again, but where it gets really interesting and loaded is its definition when it comes to nautical vocabulary, where it means to haul or hoist something with a tackle, which is really interesting because its alternative form, baus, mainly meant the nautical meaning to haul or hoist something with a tackle. So let's take a look at that tackle word. Now we're going to go into this tackle word because it's like in the logo. When you look at the logo, the skull wearing the straw hat has a rope in its mouth, and it is the rope is pulling it to the back of the word in the reading direction, and then the anchor is flipped the opposite way. Just the whole thing. The idea of there being a pull or some sort of a grip to move someone or to kind of influence their actions in whatever form that takes. I mean, is the entire story of One Piece, starting with page 1 with Roger setting the world off on the golden age of piracy, and then ending with Shanks, giving the hat to Luffy, kind of like attaching a rope to him, knowing that, hey, bring this back to me sometime. The idea of characters being hoisted by their dreams, for whatever purposes, is present throughout the manga, from page 1 to, every page you've ever read, and every action the characters have ever taken. And like everything else in One Piece, it starts, before the story even begins, it starts with the logo. Now the word tackle comes from the Middle English word takel, which is a gear or apparatus. Gear hint, anyone? Which all comes from the Middle Dutch or Middle Low German word takel, which is a ship's rigging. And the word could relate to the Middle Dutch taken, which was to grasp or seize, and then other words that just mean ultimately tackle. Now as a noun, tackle means a device for grasping an object and an attached means of moving it, like a rope and a hook. It also means equipment, gear, or gadgetry, which kind of brings to mind Luffy's gears. And ultimately, a tackle as a verb means, a lot of things, but to face or deal with or attempting to overcome or fight down. In the ideas of like it's an emotion, you can view that like the same way as to brew over an emotion and to stew over an emotion are the same, kind of thing. Tackling an emotion is trying to get over it, just like brewing over an emotion might be an attempt to get over it. And then lastly, tackle as a verb means to hit on or pursue a person that one is interested. Kind of like going fishing with a lure, like maybe using some bread as bait on a fishing line for a fishing lure to catch something that you want. And I think in this case, the thing that everyone is trying to catch is ultimately Luffy. With the idea of it being a lure or a bait for something is what we're going to get into right now. So obviously a lure is to attract or bait something, usually by temptation, appeal, or guile, to entice something. Or in the case of One Piece, someone or someone's. Now quickly just looking at the definition of the lure stuff, something that tempts or attracts, especially one with a promise of reward or pleasure. Now that sounds exactly like what Roger does on page 1 of the manga. And then, of course, in falconry, a lure is a bunch of feathers that are attached to a line that is used to recall the hawk. So that should bring to mind Zoro's attraction to his goal and, Mohawk's hat maybe. But more importantly than any of that, when we really take a close look at the first time that the words Binks Sake are actually said in the manga, and that entire interaction of Brook meeting the crew, it's really kind of eye-opening how much the entire crew bends to, the will of something. How much they're influenced immediately by attraction and excitement and reward and adventure and pleasure and all these things. Especially if you adhere to the idea that Luffy's dream was this biggest party idea. Then we know Luffy's been searching for a musician since forever so he can throw parties. So the idea that he's been looking for Brook out there in that sense, but I think it's actually the other way around. Perhaps something or some entity or some place has been brewing and waiting for Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates. Now, really, the biggest aspect of all this stuff with the idea of a bait or a lure and a tackle is honestly us as the audience. I know I've been wondering, since I first read One Piece in the U.S. Shonen Jump in 2003, what exactly the One Piece was. But on a fundamental level, luring the world to do something, tackling the world to action, so to speak, is what the Great Age of Piracy is and what Roger accomplished as the King of Pirates. But let's stay on this line of thought for a second with tackle and the idea of an object or something grasping an individual as a means to move it.
No, it's this sandwich.
A sandwich? You expect me to break my back over a sandwich?
Not a sandwich. The sandwich.
So I guess you could say maybe the idea of being the Pirate King is what takes Luffy from Windmill Village in Chapter 1 all the way to where he is now. Or maybe that's the hat. But we'll get to that.
Now, little man, I give the watch to you.
This idea of a lure kind of taking something from one place to the other, let's stick with that and look at the very first time that Binks Sake's ever been mentioned in the manga. And it just so happens to be the exact panel that we also meet Brook for the first time. Now in the official Viz translation, Brook first sings, "Time to ship out, Binks's brew." And then in the scanlations he says, "Go and deliver Binks brew." So right there already a difference in the plurals, Binks and Binkses. But let's look a little deeper at what happens next with the idea of attraction, forcing someone's actions to be changed. Number 2. Catching the crew, hook, line, and sinker. Now, actually, I kind of think there's quite a lot to the idea that Brook might have been waiting there in his ghost ship in the Florian Triangle for some crew to be dumb enough to pick up that barrel from the sea and open it up and set off that firework. But, if not, either way, after they do that, weather goes crazy, the sea goes crazy. Like the song says, waves will be our guide, I suppose. But waves guide them right to the ghost ship. To me, the more interesting thing said in this ghost ship page is the yo-ho-ho-ho part. Earlier we were talking about nautical terms, and this is another one. When it comes to nautical terms, yo and ho both are used to draw a crewmate's attention on the deck of a ship. They're both the two main words that you would use on a pirate ship, to get someone's attention. Yo, hey, duck your head. Ho, watch out. Those were actually the nautical terms. And I bring that up because it's such a prevalent part of the Binks Sake song. And the very next page we actually get a real clear clue about the song where Usopp talks about this, song from the ship cursing them if they listen to it. He refers to it in the official translation as the sailing song of evil spirits. And now throughout Thriller Bark, Brook seems to know everything, but we have to wait till after the time skip to get, a clear explanation of his powers a little bit more. In the Viz translation, it says, "By playing music, I can rock the souls of others, drawing them into my world, and even showing them illusions." In the scanlations, the line is, "Through my music, I can touch the souls of others with this energy, drawing them into my world, and even bewitching their senses," which sounds a lot like a, tackle, bait, and lure situation again. But literally on this, page after meeting the ghost ship, the entire crew seems to be mesmerized by this ship and the idea of what could be on it. Now, this whole first page we meet Brook, I think, is super important. I think stuff with the eye, with Luffy's eye there and oars and all sorts of stuff is very relevant, especially how we see this scene later when we meet another ghost ship. But outside of all that, just on this page looking at it, we immediately get the crew running over, excited, trying to see what's on there. But when they finally get up there, it starts getting weird. Brook immediately says that he apologizes for greeting them weird, that he hasn't met anyone in decades. But we know relatively shortly that that's not true. He was meeting people at least as early as 5 years ago with his shadow. Now, maybe he's not considering zombies or all these souls and all these reanimated things as people, but he considers himself a person, and he's one of those things. So I find that hard to rectify. Nami immediately kicks him in the afro, which seems to hurt him, which I also think is important. But then, Sanji has a bunch of questions which are immediately ignored when Luffy immediately asks Brook to join the crew. Now, the entire symbolism of this page is, I think, very important and actually very relevant to recent chapters, but I have to explain more before we can get to that. I'm sorry. Now, when Brook first gets on the ship, the rest of the crew kind of has mixed reactions to him, but eventually he will win them all over, one by one, meticulously. But just starting off, Zoro has a problem with him. We get Nami trying to attack him with an article of clothing instead of her actual body, and there's no damage to the hair. But immediately, Brook decides when the crew's going to eat, which hilariously Zoro comments on, but no one else seems to notice in the crew. Once they all sit down for dinner, Brook immediately starts buttering up Frankie. And I say that because by complimenting the make of the ship, he realizes that Frankie is very susceptible to compliments and being flattered. But let's forget about the fact that Sanji, warns Frankie not to listen to him. But we start with Brook being very excited to eat. Now, he doesn't need to eat, he says that, and he's a skeleton, he can't really process the food. But he does, talk about using the bathroom. The idea of wanting to consume and process food and fuel instead of needing to, I think is a very important clue to what is going on here. When they sit down to eat, in the Viz translation, Luffy calls him a Koropokkur. Now, I think we can break that word into core and buckle and follow that, but without doing that, the closest thing to start off with is carbuncle, which comes from the Latin carbunculus, meaning a small coal or a reddish kind of precious stone, a kind of tumor, all being a diminutive of carbo, a coal or charcoal. And the word means a deep red or fiery colored garnet or other dark red precious stone, especially when cut with carbachon, which is just a cutting stone. It's also an abscess larger than a boil, like a tumor. Otis playing with the word boil again. And then unpopular and ugly building or eyesore, which would make me think of the decrepit state that the ghost ship that Brook was on when the Straw Hats found him. But where it gets really interesting is looking at the origin words for carbuncle, which are the Latin carbunculus and the Latin carbo. Now, the Latin carbunculus also just means a small coal, but it also means a kind of sea stone, a red toth stone, a reddish bright kind of precious stone again, and then also a disease, and in particular a kind of tumor again, like a boil, and a disease caused by roar frost, which if you look into it is a very similar looking process as the disease that Law had as a child, that amber lead disease. And then the other word, carbo, it stems from a whole bunch of words that mean heat or fire or hearth or to be burnt black or to burn, which reminds me of all that boiling talk that we had with the definitions of brew and booze and all those words earlier. In the scanlations, Luffy actually calls Brook a Koropokkur, which, according to the scanlations, is a mythical Ainu dwarf god. Now, looking into that word a little bit deeper, the Koropokkur, and I apologize for, I'm going to be butchering all these words, I'm very sorry. It referred to a race of small people in folklore for the Ainu people, which was people that lived in the northern Japanese islands. And the name is pretty much in three parts, where the Kuro part means butterbur plant, the Pak part means under or below, and the Kuru is a person. So it's interpreted to mean the people below the leaves of the Fuki, which makes sense because they were believed to live in pits with the roofs of them covered with butterbur leaves, I guess. Now these people, they were supposed to be super good at fishing, and they were very, very agile, and they were short, so it doesn't fit Brook, but it fits a lot of other people we've seen, especially in the most recent chapter. And I say that because one of the main things for these Koropokkur things is that these wooden dolls they would make of them, and they look just like the things that were in Sakayuki Kozuki's little underground lair that he just showed Robin in the newest chapter in 1054. And according to the mythology, the Koropokkur were on good terms with the Ainu. They would exchange gifts, and they would get deer and fish and all sorts of stuff with them. But the little gods, they really did not like to be seen, so they would always only ever do things at night. So they were basically on good terms for forever, until one day someone from the Ainu wanted to see one of these creatures, and so they waited for them in ambush at night in one of the places by a window where they would exchange these gifts and food and stuff. And when he finally caught the Koropokkur monster thing, it ended up being a beautiful woman who was so enraged by this infraction that she made her people leave, and they've never returned since. This mythology is, for me, enough. I'm going to mark it down as a clue of maybe something or some entity living underground, waiting or being brewed in some sort, or mad or stewing over something. But since it's not in the official translation, take it with a grain of salt. So then we get kind of an ominous shot of the Revive Fruit's name over a bunch of empty plates. But after a couple pages of Brook seemingly joining the crew and eating with them and talking, they then notice that he has no reflection in the mirror. And at that point, Brook then kind of talks about his shadow being missing and that he couldn't go with them anyway, even if they wanted him to join the crew. And immediately, Luffy says he will save his shadow for them. Now, Brook endears himself to the audience, I think, in this moment even more, because he immediately warns Luffy, you shouldn't risk your life for someone that you just met. But Luffy is already hooked at this point. And the very next page, instead of answering any more questions and talking any more about this stuff, Brook immediately plays a song, which, like I said, we know eventually he can influence others with the music. I think that he can probably do that now, especially considering that he starts playing this music after saying they can't go into Thriller Bark, and when he's done playing this song, they're coincidentally inside Thriller Bark Trap. As soon as Perona's ghost comes in, Brook runs outside and asks them if they opened up a barrel with that whole barrel trap thing, which would, to me, imply that he's seen that done before, which would make, kind of that lie again about hasn't seen people in decades a little bit more noticeable. But as soon as they jump outside, Brook claims that the ship came from the West Blue, which I don't know how this huge ship, Thriller Bark, made it through, Reverse Mountain. And then Brook kind of immediately tells them, I gotta go run and get my shadow. Do not put your anchor down. Do not follow me. Do not, all this stuff. It's kind of like, to me, an obvious moment where it's like, when you tell someone, don't touch that thing, and then you just have to touch it, or, don't ask a question, and all you want to do is ask a question. All of those things, to me, that's kind of like what, the idea of a pirate is, In Odin's flashback, Roger even talks about, the world government and everybody saying we can't research these things makes you want to even more, or makes it even more believable. After we see, Brook walk on water and be very agile like those Kuro doll things, we immediately see that Luffy's hooked and he didn't hear anything and he's ready to go follow him. And now in one of the early Romance Dawn prototypes, we get a big clue from Oda about what these stars mean. And we see it in the eyes all the time, and we see it around cool things. These little stars that are around Luffy right now signal attraction. And attraction can work lots and lots of ways, like we've been talking about. But at this moment, Luffy, his eyes are closed. They're replaced because they've been replaced by these stars, which we will get to the stars and the lack of them in one piece in this video. At this moment, Luffy's caught. Hook, line, sinker. He wants Brook part of the crew, and now the rest of the crew has to be convinced. So we meet Brook in volume 46, and it's actually a chapter after Ace and Blackbeard have their duel on Bonero Island. But after this initial time that Brook leaves, we actually don't meet Brook again for the rest of this volume. the rest of the Straw Hats follow Luffy onto the island of their own volition. And actually, when Luffy first gets onto the island, he's holding a fishing net. But and we also get a Nico Robin saying, it's cute, which I think is a reference to the idea and clue from the prototype of, the stars mean attraction and cute and all that stuff. Being something that pulls something or attracts something to it. But when Brook actually does come back, it's against that weird spider thing, Terraland. Brook actually falls from the sky above Frankie and Robin. Now, is this, a reversal of that, firework trap thing? Maybe. But I definitely think that him falling out of the blue in front of Frankie is on purpose, like I mentioned earlier with the knowing Frankie was susceptible to his charms. But interestingly enough, Brook actually ends this fight against Terrorland by playing Binks Sake to distract the spider monster, and I'm thinking that he was using the recording because he's holding his hat off of his head. I'm thinking that because during those moments, the scabbard cane part of his hidden cane sword is missing in these two scenes when he's holding his hat. So I'm thinking that it was probably playing the recording. But either way, he plays Binks Sake, the recording of Binks Sake, to this monster, distracting him while he can put salt in his mouth to purify him. Now, that sounds a lot like what happened when Brook first entered the ship and them all having the meal together. And if that wasn't enough, we get his attack is the 3-pace hum notch slash technique, whatever. I think the main clue in that is the 3-pace hum part being a reference to the 3 combining words in that Kuro doll thing. Brook immediately changes the subject and says, well, since you're already here, I'll tell you the whole reason I have to do all this stuff to get my shadow back. Now, when Brook starts explaining the island to Frankie and Robin, he immediately kind of mentions that he's been stuck in the Florian Triangle for so long because his rudders have been broken, and he's only been able to float along the currents. Well, that's kind of, to me, a glaring clue to the lyrics of the song, and it not being a good idea to go without a navigator into the ocean and just let the currents take you where they will, most likely straight into the mouth of pure danger. And so Brook kind of goes into the story of how he lost his shadow, which immediately contradicts the idea that he hasn't met anyone in decades, because he says he sees people there. I guess he doesn't technically meet them, so, let's not harp on that too much. But then we immediately get Brook kind of explain about how he knew about using the salt to affect the zombies and everything. But we get a very interesting explanation after all that of what's going on Thriller Bark. And he talks about how there are several Mario that are always kept in a research lab freezer from throughout the centuries, and it's to revive the bodies of legendary warriors with strong shadows. Now, in the Fizz translation, instead of Mario, it says marionettes. But when we see Ryuma outside of Hogback's lab, it does say Mario there. What's really interesting to me is looking at this zombie they first show. To me, it very clearly has the smile devil fruit design on the arm there in the stitching. And I think the number clue on his arm could be important too. 518 is a chapter titled The Arena or the Coliseum, and it's where Luffy is imprisoned by the Poa Hancock sisters, which I think does relate to the next part of this chapter. But what's more interesting is when you flip that around to be 815, it's a chapter called Take Me With You. Please take me with you. And it's got Vivi on the cover, kind of looking up at the sky, maybe wishing she was somewhere else or with other people maybe, or looking lustfully, nostalgically at the sky.
So you thought you'd skip out on old crabs, did you? Even after you promised to help me. There's only one use for a backstabbing crew like you. Live bait.
And I'm really not trying to pick on the Library of Ohara or Arthur's videos or in any way. They do a tremendous amount of work for the community, translating SBSs and all that stuff. And I love the content and stuff. And just he kind of has the best video to kind of use as prove my points against. And in that video he mentions nostalgia being like looking back at good memories and stuff, but that's actually not a very accurate translation. It kind of comes from the Latin words meaning returning home and pain. And there's a lot of arguments to be made that nostalgia can mean for an entire group of people our pain, which to me kind of epitomizes what that recording of Binks Sake is, considering they all die while singing.
No one's ever really gone.
Instead of turning around to meet Laboon, Like, I thought we learned in chapter 1 that being a man meant not getting into stupid fights or doing stupid things. But I guess in this instance, it's a good thing that they don't turn around and go back to Laboon. But we'll talk about that when we get into the actual recording. But before we leave Brook and Frankie and Robin out there talking, Brook begs them to listen to them, and then he also asks them very nicely to please listen to his plan. And of course, Brook's plan is for them to leave and go back to his ship. I personally think it's another kind of false, please don't help me, and, to try to get them to want to help him more. And I say that because after we get this explanation of his plan, Brook kind of hints at him knowing Laboon and wanting to get back to Laboon. The way he says it in the manga, he's fishing to be asked about it. Now, Frankie and Robin don't know who Laboon is, but Brook wants this story to be told to the rest of the crew through Frankie, so he needs to tell them it here. I say he's waiting to be asked here because in the official translation, we get 3, periods and then the exclamation points. In the scanlations, we get 20 periods, waiting, and then 3 exclamation points. To me, that is a big clue that it's just he is sitting there waiting, please ask me. And then Frankie does. Frankie takes the bait and asks him who this friend that Brook needs to get back to is. And then when we cut back to Frankie and Robin after hearing the Laboon story, which we see that same zombie from before with the Your Song shirt. And we also see Captain John. In this moment, look at Frankie's face, and him and Robin immediately talk about it, and they've both been hooked by Brook's endearing story and the idea that he's trying to return to his whale friend who's been missing him for the last 50 years. Now, ultimately, after that, we get, our first shot of Ryuma sitting there and singing, which I actually think is ultimately where this thing that might be brewing is. I think it's in Wano, and I think the newest chapter greatly hinted at that with the Pluton being there. We then get the shot of Brook showing up in front of Ryuma, where we get that Mario or marionette sign again. And I can't help but notice that Brook's cane looks suspiciously like a hook, and we just heard about this idea of bringing souls to newer bodies and all these things into refrigerators. This chapter, of course, is the chapter we meet Oars, and it's called The Demon from the Land of Ice. Everything about this page, from the barrels in the back to the boxes and crates with the X's on them, to Ryuma drinking hot brewed tea, everything in this page is, to me, a big clue that about what we know from the Odin flashback, that Wano is meant to boil, and ultimately I think be a type of witch's brew or cauldron. But you'll have to check out my Fisher King video for that. But this idea of maybe Brook or some entity using Brook to fish maybe Luffy to a certain location, I think is also clearly hinted at when Oars, not just when the shadow of Luffy is used to reanimate Oars' corpse, but when he first wakes up, everyone remembers him screaming meat and being like Luffy. But we actually, the very first shot that Brook met Luffy, we focus in on his left eye. And the very first shot when Oars wakes up, it's that same left eye focused, shot. Different angle and everything, but the idea is the same. The symbolism is still present. Now let's go into this Jiguro of the Wind guy for a second, with the dude that wears the Your Song shirt and has the questionable mustache. Now when we meet him, obviously he has Zoro's shadow, so he highlights again how a swordsman never runs away and a mark on their back is a swordsman's shame and stuff. I say that because we keep seeing this Your Song guy, which also references, all the times Yorkie in the flashback was, saying play that song and all these things, which I think is a clue. We get that highlighted again about how a swordsman doesn't run away, and that basically it seems like a swordsman only has his pride, or their pride. And then every single time we're shown anything with Brook, and he calls himself a swordsman or a fencer and all these things, yet he does not act like how we know a swordsman is supposed to act, which, might actually turn Zoro off at this moment, which is where I think Frankie comes into play again. So we have to go back to what I was saying earlier about the biggest person that Oda is always trying to hook and fool and lead on is us as the readers, and it's a give and take relationship. He does that here with Frankie, and here we'll go back a little bit and talk about how Frankie's been compromised. When I was talking about that story about meeting Laboon, at that moment, Robin and Frankie do not know who Laboon is. This entire moment that he's telling this story is for us as a reader to now care about Brook. And Frankie then relates this story to the rest of the crew on the ship, which we actually know from Brook's plan, saying go back to your ship with your friends, is exactly what he wanted. And I mean that more because at this moment, half the crew's still on the fence about Brook joining and being a good guy and trustworthy and all this stuff, but this story of him being somehow a surviving pirate for Laboon's lost pirate crew convinces the rest of the crew and endears him to the crew, and they all want him to join them. Even Zoro, like let's go save all these shadows now. Quickly before that, we get a close-up shot of Luffy's left eye when they mention Laboon. I think that's another reference to when they first met Brook, and also the Oars Awakening moment, which again to me fits this idea of brewing. If the whole idea is to get maybe a certain group of people or peoples or someone to a certain place, over time, all this stuff. At this moment, if Luffy wasn't already hooked, when he hears about Laboon and this whale that's his friend and all this stuff, he's definitely hooked now. But of course, this is where it comes in, Frankie being compromised again, and he comes into the story to kind of hide things from us once again. And I don't think he knows he's doing any of these things, but through his actions, we're going to miss some things once again. And I say all that because in this moment, I think there's a real danger of the illusion or mirage that is over Zoro fading. If he were to find out that Brook is not an actual swordsman or does not have a swordsman spirit, which is something he mentions against Ryuma, that he has a real swordsman spirit after they're done fighting. I actually think that's why Frankie's there in this moment. Frankie kind of pops onto the scene and, takes controls of the reader's mind, so to say, with what he says about the fight and the actions about to take place. Frankie mentions about if you can put your pride to the side, maybe Zoro can take your place in this fight, which we know from Zoro, who is the epitome of being a swordsman in the series so far to us as readers, that's just not how, a swordsman acts. But Frankie is at this point, we're supposed to, I think, view him, and even now, as the most manly, with quotation marks, member of the crew. And him being the one to say, put your pride aside, all this stuff, is there to fool us into not noticing that this is not the way of a swordsman. Of course, after this fight, Suishui, the sword, has chosen a new owner with Zoro. I would honestly say I think that at this point, Zoro going to Wano at some point, it was already assured. But at this point, he's totally, the hook has gone through his cheek as a fish, and he is getting dragged to Wano whether he likes it or not. Which honestly I think was, the other half of the point of Thriller Bark, which was ensuring that Zoro and Luffy would be making their way to Wano eventually. But now let's jump ahead to some real juicy clues. And that's the moment, the whole recording and everything of the Binks Sake song that Brook plays when he officially joins the crew after Thriller Bark. To me, I've officially dubbed this over the last few years as the moment where Oda completely has hooked the audience and fooled the entire world. Now, he's been fooling us since chapter 1. Trust me. At this point, to me, this is really when he has, completed his master stroke, and he knows for sure now that he is going to be able to tell the complete version of his story, because he's totally pulled the wool over our eyes and has us completely fooled. We're listening to the music and not noticing what's getting jammed down our throats. Or maybe the shank in our back. But that's for my Fisher King video. You'll have to click on that one, once I have it up. Number 3. Let's look into where the recording actually came from a little more thoroughly than not at all. So let's just get right into it. How come Brook's ToneDial, the one he used to record the Rumbar Pirates singing Binks Sake while they tragically met their demise, how come that ToneDial looks exactly like Ursula's chair from her lair in the Little Mermaid movie? Yeah, that's right, Ursula, the lady who tricked Ariel into signing a contract handing over her voice, which according to the movie was the most beautiful voice in the world, to try to win the love of Prince Eric. Which of course Ursula trapped in a suspiciously similar looking seashell and spiral shape that we might be familiar with in the story. Of course, earlier versions of that fairy tale have the Ariel equivalent's voice being so beautiful that it could charm men into doing whatever the voice wished, and she gave up her fins and legs, 4 legs, that ended up allowing her to dance unlike anyone else on Earth, which, given recent events in the manga, sounds kind of familiar. So after everyone's shadows have been saved towards the end of the arc, Brook finally plays the Binks Sake song for the crew. And I really think that this entire interaction is very important. We get Brook starting to play the song, and then we know, like I said, we know from later on that when he plays music, he can influence things. Well, he starts playing the music, and then everything that we've seen and know happens. Now, I said earlier about how Brook planted the story with Frankie to be told, so I think that this entire page here where he's not remembering the name 100% and is shocked that Luffy knows who he's talking about, I think all that stuff is fake. And this is another page where Brook is sweating quite a bit, I think, because he's a little bit afraid to be figured out. But he started playing the music, so everyone starts getting fooled. And then we get a bunch of stuff before the flashback starts where Brook has lost his tooth. Now, we know from SBS's that Oda kind of jokes about the teeth a lot, and it's happened in Chapter 1, and he talks about it being when a character drinks milk, they can get their tooth refilled in. But I really think that this is one of the biggest examples that all of that is something weird going on every single time it happens. And with this one, Brook has his tooth missing and cracks in his face, and they disappear as soon as he drinks the milk of the crew. And by that, I kind of mean just like the essence of the crew. He's started to feed on it in some way, whatever form that takes. And then we start off the flashback with a pretty ominous shot where we don't actually see Brook's eyes. We cannot tell if he has eyes or if he's wearing the glasses still. And then we see him kind of luring Laboon. Now, and I know the official narrative is they follow him and all this stuff, that Laboon follows the Rumbar pirates too far and gets stuck. But I really, really question that with all the stuff we know about playing music and like Pied Pipers and type deals, leading children to bad places. I really have to question here, especially with how scary Brook looks right here, the entire narrative around this with Laboon. And after the Laboon explanation, we jump into Brook on his own for a while on the ship, having memories about stuff. Lots of things are weird about this ship, like the couch is missing, just weird things. I'm not, all the stuff that we saw when Luffy asked him to join the crew first is not there on the deck. But what's most interesting about this chapter is that it has the only panel outside of a cover page in the One Piece manga that we have seen stars. And keeping in mind that a manga page is printed on two sides, and that if you rip it out of the book and put it up next to light, you can see through it, the only panel that has stars in the entire One Piece manga outside of cover pages is when Brook is looking at himself in a mirror, when you use light to actually look through the page. And then after that page with only stars, we see Yorkie's wanted poster for the first time, and then after visiting a dentist and having his teeth covered, he's declared to have the plague and must leave. Now, I would say you could figuratively look at this as the light leaving Brook's eyes since they're losing their captain for the whole crew. Stuff like that I think fits on one level. But I really question the truth and validity to this entire moment. Nothing about the Rumbar Pirates flag makes sense with the horns, and it really kind of looks like his hat to me with the curved sides. So I really think that all of this is a total fake out for us, and perhaps even most flashbacks have been, but that'll be in future videos. And I bring up such a big deal about the teeth and the Yorkie thing with the dentist or whatever, as kind of a joke, but also because they're really worried about spreading the plague. Yet the only person wearing a mask, including the doctor, all this stuff, is Yorkie. And personally, I think that there's a lot of really crazy out there things going on, and I think that his chin having an F on it for a failure of an experiment might be a real thing. But just like the flashback, let's not ask any questions here and move on. And this is where Brook whips out that Ursula chair-looking ToneDial. And I'm sure as readers we weren't really that shocked because we had just seen ToneDials in Skypiea, but the rest of the Rumbar pirates are shocked that Brook has a ToneDial when he presents it to them. So it really makes me question where exactly this ToneDial to record this music came from. Especially since it kind of seemed like one of the main things of the Rumbar Pirates was that they had to play music and they were trying to play music everywhere they went. And the idea of them having a recording device with them, I feel like would have been extremely helpful earlier in the adventure. I guess it wasn't until they're just on the verge of death. And I think it's very weird that in the 3 years that Brook was captain, it doesn't seem like they got the ToneDial during then because the rest of the crew would have noticed it. So I'm thinking that if he had it for a long time, perhaps you know, maybe they would have used that with Yorkie to put him on the last message to Laboon if it was super important to get the whole crew on there for it. And then, of course, Brook, you know, asks to play the recording for Luffy, you know, kind of like how a vampire has to ask permission before entering a house or a dwelling. And he says that he wants to play it for Laboon to show that they met their end joyously. And then we get a shot with a bunch of swords and people on the ground. Now, this shot is universally used throughout the manga to highlight Wano and that sword sticking out of the ground. And believe it or not, it's all a Sword in the Stone reference, but that will be in the Fisher King video next. And here's where now this same kanji I think can be Tom riddled to become the same kanji for the sound effect that we see in the newest chapter when Robin finds out that the Pluton is in Wano. And my friend and kanji translating extraordinaire Elson put together for me that this kanji can translate to "isn't it so bright or brilliant," which makes me think about Toki's prophecy talking about knowing the brilliant dawn and the unaware moon, all that stuff. Now, the idea of shining brilliantly comes from, you know, the very definition of brilliant is to shine brightly, but it has many definitions like all the words that we're talking about. And it really sticks out to me because it's also used in Game of Thrones to refer to the Dawn Sword, which I think is kind of the hidden meaning, and I think it's what Oda's going for too. Now, brilliant can mean having a sharp or clear tone, like for singing too, but it comes from the Italian word brillare and the Latin word beryllus. Now, the beryllus word in Latin means a beryl, gem, or eyeglass. So all the things that we know about Brook are included in this word. He wears the eyeglasses in his flashback, the gem of memory of his voice, of his musical playing. We can get figurative with that one, but really I think he's hunting gems. And the barrel, you know, doesn't mean this here, but it sounds like barrel, and that's what we see all the time in Binks Sake being held in a barrel, stuff like that. And now the kind of cool thing to me about Brilliant is one of its kind of more obscure connections, and something that I also think George R. R. Martin is doing with Game of Thrones books is we all know that Oda loves video games and he loves referencing material. Well, one of the oldest games there are is for video games is chess on the computer, and I think that George R. R. Martin and Ichiro Oda are both making this reference where in the oldest chess games, when you would sacrifice one of your own pieces to make a good move, it was labeled brilliant as a score. And that ties into the whole idea that you'd, you know, kind of honor your enemy by saying that was a brilliant move, even though it hurt you, stuff like that. But as a noun, it actually means a hummingbird or cotton goods that are figured on the weaving. So we get another humming clue, the three-pace hum stuff, and hummingbirds, and we get the weaving clue like in the lyrics, which makes sense because one of the origin words for brilliant is brillar, which means to imitate the sound of a bird. And then that other brillo, it means tipsy or drunk, a bird's fast wind beats, so the how fast it's flapping its wings, and of course a sparkling glitter or shine. But with all these bird clues one after another, I think it's time that we go into a little bit of how much Oda plays with words. Now, in the SBS for chapter 837, we get a question that also relates to all this stuff immediately. In the question, a summer mandarin is the name of the person. They ask, they talk about how in Japanese the sound V makes a B sound. So with that in mind, when we change the word Binks Sake to start with a V instead of B, so instead of Binks, it's Vinks. Well, Vink is actually a type of bird, a Dutch dish, or a check mark, and the earliest definitions of it mean to wave or beckon. But as a name, Vink has an Anglo-Saxon origin, and it's for someone who catches finches and other small birds. And then if you want to go the other route, staying with the B, one of the old things for Bink is that it was a name for Ben, and the name Benjamin. And now Benjamin comes from is derived from the Hebrew Benjamin, Benjamin. But where it gets really interesting is in German, the name Benjamin relates to the word wolf. So all of this kind of being, you know, Little Red Riding Hood being led to the mouth of the, you know, big bad wolf is kind of, I think, the overall major implication here. We know that Oda does all this stuff with myths and stories and all these things. Well, he's also trying to reference every, kind of fairy tale there's ever been. And if you look into fairy tales, you will see that there are thousands and thousands of different classifications for the same exact stories. Not the same exact stories, but the same exact ideas and all these things. And he is trying to touch on that as much, if not more, as he is with all the myths and religion and all the other things that he takes inspiration from. But back to that Vink thing, on that same SBS page, the page across from it is chapter 838, Chobro, and it's got Shanks on the cover, and they're all kind of looking, the actual quotation is a wedding at a certain ruined island. So the only thing that makes me think of is, perhaps Loki at Elbaf, but that can't be it. But what's really, really, really crazy is cactuses. I'm not going to go into the entire process here, but essentially cactuses store light overnight. They have little nodes they open, they call them spines, and they open those things, absorb stuff during nighttime for food, and then once dawn breaks during the day, they convert that stored energy into food, and it's how they don't waste water and stuff. And I think that there's a lot of clues about, maybe that being a case for some entity gathering up all the food and energy in the world to maybe eat it somewhere or blow it up somewhere. But then when we look at those sound effects in English that play when he whips out the ToneDial, it's extremely interesting and revealing. With all of the definitions and ideas we've talked about earlier in this video, this page is where they kind of all started for me. Every single sound effect used on this page has a deeper meaning and is a word that is, we're going to see right now, be pretty relevant to what we've been talking about. And now let's just jump right in. Llama in Old Norwegian means lamb, which is a paralyzed or young lamb, and in Old Norse, lammy is delicious or tasty. It's also sexually attractive or to limp or a leg, which Shanks' name also means leg or a limp. And it comes from the French word lame, meaning a blade or a religious person, or llama. Now, jama is a word from Pali, which means vulgar or contemptible, but its Sicilian root also meant leg, and it can also be a type of dance. Now, a plink is a short, high-pitched metallic or percussive sound. It's like when, you plink a piano chord. And as a verb, actually, it does mean just to play a song on the piano. But the sport of plinking is to shoot a unconventional target with a gun, which to me is, if you think about, shooting an unconventional animal or something with a figurative gun, kind of means to catch the biggest target in the world maybe with an unconventional lure, is what I take the meaning as. Now, plu, I think there's a lot of things you can play around with the words, do whatever. It can mean loop, stuck in an infinite loop, all this stuff. But polo, obviously, is the game. And in the game, it's, two teams on horseback are using a mallet to hit a rubber ball between each other. And I think if we can think of Luffy and maybe Buggy as that rubber ball being popped around the world, doing things and forced to kind of do things in, whatever shape that takes, I think that's what this word is alluding to. But with all of these and with all these definitions, I know that I do not know all of them. I only speak English, sadly. I do not have a vast knowledge of all these, all this stuff is just research I've been doing. And if anyone sees stuff that I missed, please comment, because I'd love to learn all these, because I think that these words are the key to everything. The language is the key that Oda is trying to, the main message is he's trying to teach us how much history can be hidden within the very languages and letters that we use, because it's really honestly one of the only clear ways to kind of track true history is by finding who and how and why the words were changed in various cultures and eras and different time periods. And then that idea kind of takes us to Jaro, which pretty much universally means either spring or year in every single language. So the idea of the seasons being trapped like in Game of Thrones, or the stars being trapped, something like that, maybe more magical, but maybe just like a mirage, you can't see them. A year seems to be the representation of that, because that's a measurement of time, just like Roger said in chapter 100 with his quote. The passage of time can't be stopped, but knowing your history and knowing exactly where you are in time can, and I think has been stopped multiple times in the One Piece universe. And since a year means a measurement of time, like keeping time, the person who keeps that time you could be viewed as someone who controls time figuratively. Now, jam has got so many that I could do a whole entire video, and maybe I will in the future on this, but it can be a difficult situation, it can be a blockage, congestion, all these things. Obviously, it's a track, a song, all this stuff. A forceful dunk into a thing. I think Oda is literally referencing all of these. It also means luck, tons of stuff, and also with the idea of like Mother Caramel leading kids to bad places to maybe be eaten, or maybe be, at least in one case, be eaten. Like it being a sweet mixture, the idea of trying to catch something with honey comes to mind. And now for dum dee do, there's like a million definitions that you can do. For dumb, we have the first one that comes up in English is from India, and it's a cooking with steam, so we get another brew and boiling thing. It's also a syllable used when humming a tune, you know, do. It can also be an alternative spelling of dumb, which I believe that the D means lots of things, and the biggest one that it might mean is dope, as a Simpsons reference, but also as like, oh, I should have known that the whole time, which is also, you know, another definition with dumb, you know, being stupid, being foolish, all that stuff. And then a D can refer to die and dice, but it's also something of little value, a piece of cube or diced food or whatever. And the older words for D were just to die, stuff like that, kind of universally either to die or to cease to exist. But do also means a dove or a pigeon, and one of the derived terms for that is actually the king of the dews, which is an English carrier pigeon. Which, jumping ahead a little bit, something that is in the O'Hara video that's touched on a lot is the idea of port and a port town and all this stuff. Well, the word port originally meant postage. So pigeons that carry messages in a bottle, that type stuff is what I think that Oda is playing with here all the time. And then also in some languages it just means a song. And the most peculiar one to me is that it actually means cane in some languages. And we went over yo and ho earlier, but hoi is another greeting or exclamation of joy. But in a lot of the other languages, it means deep sea or here or to be put there or to go in. Stuff like that. Like makes me think of, you know, maybe getting trapped inside the belly of a whale. Now, as a verb, hoi means to incite or to drive onward. So it makes me think of page 1 with Roger again. But as a nautical term, hoi means a small coaster vessel, which was used to take passengers or goods from the land to a bigger vessel. So the idea of moving things from one place to the other, we're touching on again. And then to finish up here, like I said, how port means, you know, meant postage or whatever. Well, allow me to ask you a question. Why does Crocus's house inside Laboon, on his house island ship, why does it have a mailbox? And I know what you're saying. I hear you. It's a moving island. But that makes even less sense that a registered mailbox would be on a thing that moves. How would the mail ever get there? Well, I actually think that I have an answer for that. The word port comes from the old Latin word portus, which meant harbor, port, haven, refuge, asylum, retreat, or a warehouse, which a warehouse is somewhere where, you know, you stock goods before they're taken to where they're going to be sold. So this idea of, you know, brewing or being stuck somewhere. Also, the word ford is touched on here, if you've ever wondered, like I did, where the idea of marine ford came from, you know, aside from, you know, cars and stuff like that. But earlier when I said that the word raft meant trap, I was a little bit stretching the truth a little bit. It does come up from a word, one of the origin words for it is actually trap, but it doesn't mean the same thing. But I was kind of using it because one of the definitions of the word raft is a collection of logs, fallen trees, and etc., which obstructs navigation in a river. So something that blocks something, like a dam, something along those lines, was kind of what I was viewing as a trap. Now, if you view the entire, you know, mouth of Laboon as a trap, you know, you're falling towards in the boat, I think that counts. But historically, that going back to that word portus, it was a large artificial harbor of ancient Rome, and it was situated on the north bank of the mouth of the river of Tiber, and it was established by Emperor Claudius, all this stuff, whatever. To me, the biggest thing here is the large artificial harbor, at the mouth of a river. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I think that the Grand Line goes north to south or south to north, not east to west. That's just one thing. But everything about this Portis thing, everything that happens when they meet Crocus here is an obstruction to their ultimate goal, you know, of finding the One Piece or freeing the world or whatever that is. Whatever we can conceptually agree on is the end goal of the Straw Hat Pirates or Luffy. Pretty much Crocus here gives him a side quest and tells him all these things in the way. And I'm not going to get into all the Crocus craziness right now, but just at a very base level, he lies about what the name is called to us, the reader, and the Straw Hats. So like, just like in chapter 1 with the Gum Gum Fruit, there are things that are going on that we know about and just no one seems to care. But now let's move on to the end of this video. And I would go into the lyrics, but the truth is, to me, they're just too unreliable. There is not a good translation, it seems like, to go off of. The official translation and the fan translations don't use the same words or place names. To me, looking at the lyrics through the lens of overall what they're saying instead of what the actual words are. We just went through all the word stuff, and I could go through the lyrics all day of what this word means and, you know, half of this word and all this stuff, but I'm starting to go crazy from it. So at the end of the day, it's just, to me, it's just not a good source to use. And I think it's time that we throw logic overboard and play some word games. Number 5. Someone's messed with my medication and I've taken too many rumble balls at this point, so we're going to talk about some really crazy shit. Now for me, there are clues and then there are clues. And honestly, then there are more clues. They're really everywhere. And for me, certain clues trump certain clues. Just like card games, just like all this stuff. And for me, above all else, the clues that stick out more than panels, more than looking through the light, more than all these weird tricks that I've kind of uncovered the last couple years, the number one clue that I follow is the words themselves and what the words say and what the word might have hidden inside that very word. Now, I'm just a guy from Ohio. My name really is Adam. You know, my wife thinks I'm semi-normal. I have 2 little dogs. I have a normal job. I have bills to pay. I do all that stuff. In my free time, I draw my own manga. I have an older series called Jinrakai, and I have a newer series I'm currently working on called The Shonen Beat. But what little free time I do have, I spend, you know, drawing and doing that, trying to do, you know, I guess my dream with my own manga stuff. But the last couple months, me and some people on Discord, there was a break week, and it was just, you know, kind of a magical break week, and just things started coming together, and we really started looking at the logo and the exact letters and words used in the logo, and it unlocked so many things for us, and it really started on this road of the magic of all these words and sounds and letters and symbols used in all this stuff. And really, I really think you can figure out the entire story from the logo. I'm sure of it. But from that, I went crazy. Man, I mean, it drove me nuts. It took me crazy places, you know, learning about history, reading about crazy things. All very cool, all stuff, you know. I thought I was a learned person, and you know, really, I really had no idea what's going on. So, but when it came to stories, I've been studying stories, you know, my whole life, and I've been trying to, you know, be a writer. And I'm very glad it's different now, you know. But when I was growing up, there was just liking manga and liking anime and stuff like that was just not a cool thing in my town. And I used to actually have to go to school with my manga books with book covers so I wouldn't get beat up. But I kind of just had no one to ever really talk to about it with. But like I said, over the last couple years and the last couple months especially, I really started meeting a lot of cool people on Discord and really talking to people around the world. And it seemed like, most importantly, that all these people, you know, they knew different languages and different words and letters and shapes and all these things. And all of a sudden, using the logo, it all started coming together. And I know when I say that, what I mean by that is it started tying together all the languages of the world. And I started kind of learn about all these, just the history of languages and all these words and everything like that. And it's kind of impossible to go into it fully here, but the logo is designed to start to teach you the basics of other languages, starting with theta from Greek and going all the way to runes and tree languages, all these things. But it really kind of start unlocking the words for me, and you start to realize things like silver tongues cut people with the harsh words because words are swords, and you think about things like how D should sound like a D, but it sounds like D, so it's kind of got a silent 2 E's in there, which makes you think of Blackbeard's original name being everything, and that it probably more accurately would be pronounced die, like a dice and all that stuff. And then you think about being chosen by fate and lucky and how that might be involved in Luffy's powers and all these things, or stuff like how Zoro's name backwards is Oars. And I'm pretty sure in the English version it's Zolo, just so we don't get that so obviously here. So there's all sorts of crazy things I think that are going on just once the words were unlocked. And then I took these same things to Berserk and Game of Thrones and all these other series, and they all had the same messages. They all had the same kind of codes and tricks and turn of phrases and all these things. And it's in a lot of manga and anime, but it's really in all the great stories and stories throughout time. I love TV tropes, and I read that religiously, and I understand all the concepts of there's nothing new and everything's been done before, and The Simpsons or some story and all these things. But this really took it to a next level, and it dawned on me that there was these messages and symbols that were pretty much prevalent in everything, whether it's intentional or not. I think a lot of this stuff might come from the subconscious levels, and it's stuff people way older than Freud have talked about and all this stuff. And but going through the logo, I realized all this language and all these things are connected, and then all these stories and myths could have connections, and all these places and peoples and things and the entire world could be connected in one piece, basically. And it starts with the letters. And then it, kind of hit me that, like I said earlier in the video, that for Oda, who I think is the greatest writer of all time. I think that he's probably the best writer. He has the best story I've ever read, and I've not read anywhere near every story, but I have read quite a bit, and he continues to blow me away. Lots of authors do, not just him, but he literally on a weekly basis, or 4 times a month, 4 weeks in a row, then, whatever, I'm blown away by him every time. But it hits me that Oda has different definitions for things, and that he takes dreams and all these things, very in very different directions. The word dream, the way that we think of the word dream, does not exist as a word before recent times. And before that, every time the word dream was used, it was used to like dupe someone or fool someone in some way. All these things, and it was just not a very. It was always like a word for like being conned, and it was just not a. If you were going to actually use the word dream the way we think of it, you would use the word dram, and even that was rare. It just really wasn't written out a lot, and all these little word tricks started piling up, and then all of a sudden, like I said, I'm hit by, okay, Oda has different meanings for things, and he's trying to accomplish and crush every dream, and we'll get to that in future videos. But for this one, I mean it as that Oda himself wants to find make the All Blue and be the Pirate King. He wants to have a story that references and combines everything. Every story, every myth, every fairy tale, every song, every video game, every basically cool thing that Oda's ever liked or watched or been interested in any way. That any thing that he's shown any amount of light to, he is putting into this series. And so really I start approaching the ideas of reading the story a lot differently. And I've been reading the story for most of my life. For 22 years or whatever it is. I got the very first Shonen Jump in November of I think like 2002. It came out early at a drug mart by where I lived, and I read it front to back a million times, and I read One Piece the most in it. I don't even remember all the chapters that it had. There had some obscure series, but I read One Piece the most, and I loved it. I've always wanted about it my whole life. I've used it as a basis to learn from my own manga, for all these things. And so, with all great stories, you start at the beginning. And I have read the first chapter, the last 2 years. I probably read the first chapter 2,000 times. I mean, I've read it. I have. There are things in there that he has hidden on the first page that are just tricks, that are end game tricks and setups and stuff, and the levels of things going on are just nothing short of immaculate design. And so I start rereading the story, a bunch of times with the idea in mind that it's got connections to everything, and to just try to follow every single connection type deal that there could possibly be in relation to any sort of clue that I find. But I mean, it really was like looking into the void. It kind of threw me for a loop, and I was out of it. And really it taught me a big lesson, because the most obvious answers are right in front of us. So fast forward, from that couple months, and I'm sitting there the other day, and I'm thinking about Pinocchio, and I'm thinking about that movie, and I'm thinking about all those tropes and story archetypes and stuff like that. And I've got some other videos coming up, and I've got some other ideas, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know where they all go. This is
I can't believe he's making me do this.
This is like the most complicated, I think, story of our era, and with that comes like the idea that I don't really think anyone has figured out anything. Like when Oda's assistants say that they watch YouTube videos all day and no one is even close, I really think that this is the stuff they're talking about. And I'm not trying to say that from anywhere other than a fan who just loves One Piece. And from some of the stuff I've read, I'd almost say he knows I'm coming, because he knows it's a game to fool us, and he knows us to tricking us, maintaining this mirage is part of it, and he knows someone's gonna come get it. So I've been told that some of this stuff is magic, and if it is, I'm pretty pissed, because my parents must have hid my letter from Hogwarts at age 11, because I did not get any training or anything like that. I've never met a witch or a wizard or anything, as far as I know. And so, like I said, I was plagued by this logo. What was this logo secret, and what was like the magical formula to get it? And so like I said, I was thinking about Pinocchio. I was watching the movie, and I was thinking about One Piece, and I just took the word Geppetto and turned it around backwards. And then you take the, from the SBSs, he plays with the words, like with Impel Down and the color powers that Miss Golden Week has. He takes parts of letters and moves them around and stuff. And this one's a really easy one. You just take the extra P and, you cut it in half. And you get Geppetto backwards is One Piece. And I think it's because, the whole story obviously is Oda's creation, and he's the father of it figuratively, and he plays with that everywhere in the manga. This is the stuff I think that he knows that no one has caught, because it is so in your face, and so, like I said, I think part of what the D means is dope. I should have known it. And this is kind of probably the biggest example is Geppetto being the One Piece, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that he's got about fate and God, and I think ultimately when the story's over, we're going to be arguing about what was free will and what wasn't free will, you know, forever. And that's really why I had to start with breaking down and dismantling Binks Sake, because it's really one of the main examples of this hidden, ulterior motive drive thing that has plagued Luffy's life since it started. Because no matter what, at the end of the day, Luffy is Ichiro Oda's main character. So whatever story he designs, Luffy's gonna have to be in it, and that I think that's part of, you know, one aspect of the point. And I'm not really sure how many points of these things there are. They may be infinite, they may be forever, and I think that's like the coolest thing with all this stuff, is it's just so multifaceted, and there's so many routes and things and mysteries, and the way he I always hated school growing up. I really did not like, you know, and but I love to learn, and you know, I think there's lots of people in systems that, you know, might, you know, like Einstein said, if we judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, you know, we're gonna think they're all stupid. So he's pretty much seems to be trying to teach us all sorts of, you know, cool things, and get us to research all these things. I just watched a Tekken video where he was talking about from one name looking into, you know, art for 30-40 minutes, and it was like that I think is what he is doing all the time. And that's kind of my main point, like I said, with this channel, is to have us, you know, kind of open up our ideas about what links and research we can really look into for this series, but also to try to highlight that just Oda is tricking us, and that he has tricked us, and that he is constantly tricking us, and he does it in such a way that, you know, you can't be mad at him. That's the point. And I think there's all sorts of things he does, but one of the main things is he tries to tell you what's a trick with its name and with the words used. And when you're growing up, you know, I think that's really where this stuff was really taking me, was yes, he's connecting all these myths and fairy tales and everything, but he's also trying to connect to every theme and lesson that you could learn and glean from stories, period. And that idea, it really made me focus on, you know, what stories, especially stories geared for younger people, are usually about. And you know, I think the number one thing he's trying to teach us is, you know, ask questions. Ask questions. Don't just take what someone tells you as the truth. Don't just take what the word that you hear, don't just take that as the gospel. You know, look into it yourself and make an informed, well-researched decision. I think that's the entire, you know, all of these great authors and everything throughout time seem to always be saying, you know, look into it yourself and don't believe everything you're told. And I mean, we see it in the story all the time, the Void Century and everything. But like I said, Oda tries to tell us the truth immediately. Going back to the logo, the easiest way to do that is to just do the simplest form of magic that's ever been, which is look into a mirror and look at the word backwards. And so this is where I'm going to introduce kind of our first rule of this channel, which is for every word, let's ask questions. And let's start by looking at it both ways. Look at it backwards, look at it forwards, look at the meanings, and see what happens. We know from the SBSs, like I said, Oda plays with the letters and the words all the time. We're going to take that concept and look at Binks Sake, Binks Brew, Binks Booze, all that stuff. And it's going to be, it's literally going to tell us all the things the rest of this video has touched on. And I'm hoping it's really going to kind of drive home this point of, you know, kind of being fished along the path, you know, being led somewhere, whether it's your will or not. It can be a very, very murky, I think will and intention and all of that kind of ideas and stuff. I think he's really trying to highlight how much in real life we're influenced by outside factors constantly. I mean, at the base level, we have to breathe. You know, we're influenced by our need for oxygen all the time, so we have to breathe to survive. Stuff like that, I think that he's really trying to get to on like a philosophical levels, touching on every single aspect of life in one story, in one piece, all that stuff. So let's look at some words. Let's look at those Binks Sake words. And with the clues we've looked at earlier, just kind of, you know, keep it simple, keep it backwards and forwards, and maybe flip it upside down a little bit. And I keep stressing the read it backwards thing because it really is in the logo. When you look at the logo, it ends with an anchor facing the wrong way. One of the things with all this languages and ancient languages and all this stuff is there were very rarely repeated letters, especially 3 times. And every single time a letter was repeated, that letter was something different. It changed. Looking at the logo, the third E is totally not an E, which is part of why I was looking at the Geppetto word for it, because I knew it was going to be a different letter because of those rules. Even looking at it as an E, as an anchor, looking at it there, and forget about the ankh, symbol in the middle there, tied to the rope that stretches around into the skull's mouth. That anchor is facing the wrong direction. If it's supposed to be pulling things down, wouldn't it be pulling it towards the end of the word instead of back to the front of the word? So to me, it's just a huge clue that we're supposed to, just like Roger and Lodestar Island, just like all that stuff. Okay, sorry about this. This is something I had to add later on, but it was something I found that was so cool I just kind of had to add it. But so this chapter that Roger talks about, where he mentions it happened all 13 years ago, came out on December 23rd, 2019. Now the closest chapter to that, 13 years ago, is chapter 439, which came out on December 25th, 2006. Now it's titled The Third and the Seventh. It's the end of the Water Postiness Lobby arc. Well, what's really crazy is that December 25th, 2006, that issue is shown in Jump. This is the author's note that was included in it. I think I worked pretty hard this year. I hear next year will be the 10th anniversary. Several projects are brewing that we've got under wraps. So obvious reference to all the brewing and boiling clues we had earlier. But what's absolutely tinfoil crazy is that this is the issue of Shonen Jump where that cross-epoch manga came out, where Ichiro Oda and Akira Toriyama drew a crossover manga together. That chapter, that special, came out this same day, okay? Now, I'll touch on it more later on in the video, but basically Oda, when he gets to certain points, he knows he's completed certain checkpoints in a video game, and I think that that's when he knows he can add the next 5-year arc or span to the story, because people haven't figured it out yet. This is where, like I said earlier, he knows that he's brewing, he's got Binks Sake, he's totally got everyone fooled in the trap, all that stuff. Well, the end of this arc in the SBS, we see this, it's in volume 50, and that volume is called Arriving Again. The ending of this arc has the SBS, where he talks about meeting with the anime and talking with them about composing the Binks Sake song and all this stuff. Well, the one question is written by someone named Fusion Ha, and we'll directly tie into this at the end of this video with where it's all going. But just for now, 13 years ago from the moment that Roger says this in real life, Ichiro Oda has worked with Akira Toriyama, and that name Akira Toriyama is going to be super influential and important, even more so than what we already know. Ultimately, it's all a clue to Akira Toriyama and that name, Akira Toriyama. Back to the video. Get to a point, the end, and then turn around and go back. And he's got some major things planned that are going to make you have to go back and reread the entire series from a different point of view, multiple times, I think. But that is for future stuff. And so let's get started with Binks Brew. Binks's Brew. I'm going to use Binks's Brew here for this first one because that's the way the official Viz translation does it. And you'll see with this first level of the word clues, we'll need every letter. With all of these, we're going to use every single letter that is present in the word, and we're just going to look at it backwards, and if we have to mix one or two around, we'll get to that when we get to that. But just looking at it backwards, we get Skiniba Werb. And I also preface this by saying that each thing we do, Binks Brew, Binks Booze, and Binks Sake, are all going to have 3 different versions of this that all are plot clues. Because I think that one of the fundamental rules of what Oda is doing, alongside the two-sided coins and all that stuff, is this principle of 3 parts combining into and making a new definition with something. And now these things are like puzzles. Sometimes it's going to be as straightforward as this one, and then sometimes, you know, we're going to have to work and around a little bit, but they're all going to be relatively simple. They're all going to be very, very easy kind of tricks. And this Binks's Brew, we're going to take out the S, the N, and the R, okay? And then we're going to put them all back in, and we get Skib Web. And then I'm going to put the S back, like I said. We're only going to take out 1 letter from each word. Put the S back so we get Skib Webs. And then the NR is another word we are going to get to. So in total, Binks's Brew backwards, we get Skib Webs NR. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it should kind of be obvious by now because we talked about it with all of our other proof in this video with the panels and all that stuff. But now the word itself is telling us all the same things that we went over earlier in this video, starting with the word skib. Now, skib comes from an Old Norse word, skip, which just meant ship, and it was along with the English ship and the German Schiff. Now, that Old Norse skip word makes me have to talk about Vikings for a second, and I'm forced to bring our attention to Volume 2.
We have to go back!
We always talk about how, you know, Oda loved Vikings as a kid and wanted to do a Viking manga. Well, this Vikings Part 2, SBS before the SBSs, to me, with all the things we looked at in this video, is pretty much one of the craziest pages I've stumbled back upon after kind of rereading this stuff. Right away, looking at the Viking, we see underneath the crown there's an IN, like you're in something, you're in a pot, whatever, and we have the chapter 13 treasure cover, which is Luffy fishing a turtle for Nami. So just crazy messages here. But let's look at the word Viking for a second, because Oda kind of lies to us a little bit with his definitions of the word. So in the very first Vikings Part 1, Oda says that Vikings were called Vikings because that's what they called themselves, which is not true. Vikings did not call themselves Vikings. They called themselves Northmen, with a crazy letter that we'll get to in my Fisher King video. They called them, and these were the words they called themselves. They called the Hapin, which were the pagans, and the Dene, which were the Danes. That's what the Vikings actually called themselves. The word Vikings just didn't really exist in like the Middle English time period and stuff, and was brought back into the forefront of usage when kind of pirates were created. Now, a lot of the stuff that we know about pirates, I don't really want to get too much into it in this video, but a lot of it is very questionable as far as its truth, and quite a bit of actually what we know about pirates was written by a guy named Erasmus. So, you know, there are things going on there, but outside of that, but he does touch on the fact that the pirates and Vikings, the word itself, kind of meant the same thing for a long time and was synonymous with each other. And they both stem from the same Old English word, wincing, which was used for both pirates and Vikings. And it does mean the same inlet and creek thing that he touches on there. But so this pirate word's got some pretty low definitions too, and it does originally stem, its main meaning is someone who plunders at sea, commonly attacking merchant vessels and pillaging port towns. So we get back to the song with the port towns idea. But this is where I think Oda is really playing with the word, because one who breaks intellectual property laws by reproducing protected works without permission, blah blah blah. A bird which eats other birds' eggs. These definitions is what made me realize that part of what Oda's doing is this whole thing where he's crushing and accomplishing and creating and destroying dreams all the time. And one of them is from when he was 7 years old, deciding to be a mangaka in Shonen Jump. And for him, part of being the real-life Pirate King is having the best manga in Shonen Jump. The Shonen Jump logo is a pirate. Now, officially, that logo, the pirate on the logo is named Journey. So I think it's all just kind of a code for stories that kind of touch on myths and try to teach themes and all these things. I think it's a much higher art form than, I was reading a thing that comics weren't even considered, an art form until the 80s and stuff. So it's crazy. Manga's been going on, I would argue that's, the idea of cave paintings being sequential art and manga and comic books are really not so different from each other. But part of the Pirate King, I think, for Oda is wanting to have the best manga in Shonen Jump, and he's shown that a couple times with covers and replacing treasure symbols with the logo and the whole bird thing, a bird which practices kleptoparasitism, which is when a bird eats another bird's eggs, for a meal. Which is directly tied to that Vink word we were talking about earlier, where Vink means, small bird hunter, with that Shanks cover and all those things with the cactuses. They do kind of all tie back to the idea of people attacking from, creeks and rivers and inlets and all this idea. So I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that a creek and brook are the same exact thing, okay? They're both little rivers, basically. I also want to say that Brook's the only Straw Hat that I've been able to find that has used their name to refer to something else in the One Piece world. No one else has used their name as a object's title, like Luffy doesn't even call his fists. He calls them weapons when he uses them. But Brook is the only person that has used his name in reference to something that he sees, and it's right before Wano, which is, I think, where this whole track thing ends. He uses his name to describe the river that they're seeing when they're going up the streams. Now, going back to Skib, I do think one way to look at it is skip, which ultimately stems from words meaning to drive or push, and to take a run or to skip. Some of it's, I think, kind of hidden meanings that Oda's touching on is to disregard, miss, or omit part of a continuation. So when people don't read arcs, or, oh, I was so bored with Skype, I skipped it, those type things, you're not going to be able to figure out the whole story without reading it. Another meaning of skip is to pass a stitch as if it were not there when you were weaving. But back to that Skib word, it stems from a German word, a High German word, Schiff, and an old High German word, Skiff, which meant ship, barrel, or vessel, or a ship or a hollow object. Now, they're also related to words mean to rib up, which brings to mind the end of the arc with the papers, to cut or lop, which makes me think of Roger. But looking at the actual definition, it just gets crazy. All those things we talked about earlier, meaning ship, means vessel for holding fluids, so a barrel, all that stuff, a cup to drink from, It also somehow means a boiler. Like for brewing things like sake and tea and water and all those things, and brewing resentment and revenge and all those things we talked about earlier. And also means a galley and a tray, which I do think is important, but not for now. And following the oldest words for it, it actually relates to a word shift, which meant to skew, oblique, slanted, or crooked for something. So kind of bent, being sideways, twisted, makes me think, maybe someone not being straightforward with, exactly what their intentions are. But also just makes me think of, read the word, backwards, forwards, upside down, all that stuff like we're doing. So basically backwards, Binks' brew, we get Skib Webs. Skib meaning ship, and then Webs.
Here it comes. That special musical treat the whole family has been waiting for. A joyous menagerie of entertainment. All spun from Charlotte's Web.
Obviously, to catch something, but looking at the word more in-depthly and specifically, it actually just used to mean weave. So we get all that weaver's talk town again. So to me, the idea that this web is being spun to bring vessels and ships of certain people and pirate crews to a certain place and keeping them on track is basically what we've been talking about this whole time, with this idea of luring and catching and leading and attraction and pull and all these things, literally leading Luffy towards the end of the story, the end of finding the One Piece, all these things. I think there's tons and tons of things going on that we're really about to see very, very soon with the story ending and entering the final saga and all that stuff. But this idea of people leading and catching ships and things is actually obviously in the word web. any interconnected set of persons, places, or things which when diagrammed resembles a spider's web. It also means to spin or weave or tell a tall tale with more complexity than an average myth or legend. Oh, like I said, Oda's trying to touch on every single theme and message ever. So he's using those same symbols and themes and ideas to tell, you know, maybe the greatest story of all time. But a web also means a plot or a scheme, but it also actually means a thin metal sheet, like a blade of a sword, a blade of a saw, all these things. The bit of a key, which I definitely think that's part of Luffy being led to where he's being led to, is because he's a key to something. And what really shocked me, actually, one of the definitions of a web is the thinner vertical section of a railroad line. If you flip one of these things upside down, it literally looks like Odin's head and Odin's hair. So if you ever wonder where that came from, you know, being the plate, boiling, all that stuff, well, I think it was all to really kind of invest their emotions in some way, keeping them right on track to do exactly what they're doing, which is follow the story that Ichiro Oda has set up so far. And then when it comes to being a verb, a web is to ensnare or entangle, obviously, like, you know, what a spider does with its food in a web, and it means to weave, back to the lyrics again. And then I said we were going to use all those letters when we did this backwards with the Binks Sake. This is where my mind was absolutely shattered and blown completely all over the floor. NR in Danish and Dutch and Lithuanian and Norwegian and Romanian and Swedish, and a lot of the places that were referred to as the northern people and these Vikings words that we just talked about, it universally is an abbreviation for numer. And now numer means number or track. So with all of our track talk, and then it is also a numer as a noun. It's a number used for identification, okay, but it's also a song or musical performance, a track. It's an issue of a publication, just like with the show, touching on the Shonen Jump stuff I was talking about and being the Pirate King of that. And it's also a number of an item on a menu, like for ordering food. So this idea of brewing something to maybe eat or consume for power or usage, pretty much all right here, and it, all right there with the NR and the numer word. Crazy. And if that wasn't enough, it also means an individual section of a show or an act. Just like the acts of Wano, just like the individual sagas and acts of the story. Binks Sake is just one part of the whole mystery for all this. This video has been dismantling that, and I might have more parts to all this. I probably will, but I'm going on to the next big mystery for the next big video. I'm gonna try to do some little videos in between that, and hopefully in like 2 weeks or whatever I can have the Fisher King video out. This is just one part of the overall huge mystery, but that's also included in this word, Binks Sake, because we're going to look at the Binks' booze and also Binks' sake, and that's where it really gets even more loaded. Like I said, I think every single mystery has at least 3 parts, and then they make a 4th new part as a whole. And I think that is maybe the minimum amount.
Are you believing the mainstream media these days, Charlie? Because...
Oh, no.
Okay.
I get all my information from my own subconscious.
Fair.
But this one, we're just going to focus on these 3 for now, and then what it all means. Which actually, part of the next one is included in this one, which the last meaning of the noun numer is an item on a numbered list like the menu thing, but in the sense of like a piece at an auction. Something you would buy at like an auction house, or maybe he's referring to other things you could buy at auction houses, or maybe something you could buy at a zoo. I briefly touched on earlier that Oda works in these groupings of 3s with clues, and the 3 things combine to make 4, and it's like a combining mecha type series thing, and that was true, but that was only kind of partly true. The way he does the clues is really otherworldly. He gives you one easily, then you use what you've learned in the first clue to adjust to the second clue, and then the 3rd part of the clue will usually encompass something kind of new to the whole equation, and I thought that was the full thing for months, and I thought that those 3 parts and what that was, you know, the whole story. And basically I was fooled. I basically figured out all the fake stuff, and it started really unraveling a lot of the way deeper mysteries that he's got hidden.
You've been seeming sus lately. It's almost like we have an imposter among us.
than, you know, the stuff that, you know, ancient weapons and all these things that we think are these huge secrets. He's got stuff hidden that we don't even know about in all this stuff.
Sussy baka.
Basically, I got into one point and it was just like what they say about the Grand Line and Lodestar. I got there, I had to turn around and go back, and then reinterpret, retranslate, and come back through forward. The way the clues work out, you get 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts. Then that makes a 4th part. Then you combine all 4 of the parts into the 5th part, and it works out exactly like the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is this crazy thing. I'm not getting into this video, but it is basically what he's trying to do. Is the more I think about it and try to conceptualize it, the only thing I can think of is kind of he's trying to put like the rhythm and sound of nature onto the page. And he's doing that by toying with our emotions, like any great author does.
All of the other writers have been in between, and there's wars and wars and wars. Now, I'm not saying you have to write about war. There are many other interesting things to write about. But if I'm going to write about war, if any writer is going to write about war, then I want him to treat war honestly. And it does bring out the beast in men, and anybody can die. It doesn't matter if you're the hero. I think everybody who died in any war thought they were the hero right to the moment that the bullet blew off the top of their skull.
And so coming back to Binks Booze, backwards it's just Skinib Ezub. We could do the same Skib thing and all that stuff that would fit from the last clue, but we're gonna each time it's gonna be a different clue set like that. It's gonna be a different type of pattern. Like I said, we're gonna be following the same basic principles last time with some change-ups, where it's like we're facing a batter the second time in baseball and we're a pitcher. And we gotta change up what we're doing, but ultimately we still have the same tools at our disposal. So Skinib doesn't really turn into anything. So we switch around the I and the N, and we immediately start to get skin. But Skinib, now we're going to take the E and replace the B from the Uzub word, and we get skine. Now, of course, skine is actually crazy relevant, and it stems from an old Norse word, skina, which meant to shine, or somehow, surprisingly enough, it meant bar or track. So going along with all our clues, all these clues are going to relate to each other.
Okay.
As we've been seeing these patterns, but each one's going to lead to a different answer to the overall mysteries. But yes, in a bunch of languages, skina means to shine, to do all this stuff. It's origin words from an old Polish word, and it was to motion or to beckon, so back to way early in the definitions. But we need to use all the letters, just like last time. So we can't have it be skina. We have to take off the E, and we just get skin. Now the word skin originally comes from animal hide, and actually it's kind of sourced similarly with the Dutch word bark. It's kind of a clue to the Thriller Bark ID and all that stuff. It can mean scales. It comes from various words that mean to split or to cut, to hide or cover, stuff like that. And with kind of those relations to the idea of skin and hide being the same, the meaning of hide is to put something in a place where it will be harder to discover or out of sight. So all the stuff we've been talking about the clues being hidden in plain sight, all of it kind of fits into the skin word somehow. So we're going to mark down skin here as the first word of the puzzle and move on. And now I did research into Izub Booze backwards a little bit, and I couldn't really definitively find that these were actual connections. They just kind of came up on Google when I put them in. But I got this crazy word, Kwabi, which meant vault, cove, basement, or cellar, but also a covering, shed, or shelter, or a tetstudo, kind of back to the hide idea. And then I got some stuff from Old Armenian, meaning edge, or the shore, or the end of something, and some Ukrainian words meaning beak, but like I said, I can't really definitively say those are 100% from certain stuff. So we're going to break the word down just a zoo. Keep it in order, just take out the... Now, obviously, a zoo is a park where animals live, but it's really defined as any place that is wild, crowded, or chaotic. So to me it kind of reminds me of the grand line as a whole. And then we're left with EBB, which firstly could mean ebb, since there's so many clues into the lyrics and in the story and panels that we shouldn't just follow the waves by themselves. I don't ultimately think that it is ebb. Now, using the apostrophe still to keep the beb inside actually takes us to a village in Hungary. Now, Hungary, I think being hungry and food is a huge aspect of Luffy's treasure and plans, and it also in Volapunk means an onion, but I think that we have to switch around the B to make a D, and that it's just makes the word bed. And so obviously a bed is where you sleep in, but the actual definition, looking at that, it's a prepared spot in which to spend the night. So this idea of maybe going somewhere to get locked away, or going somewhere where something's been locked away, stuff like that, you know, especially with considering, you know, Luffy's awakening in Wano, you could say he's been asleep until the circumstances in Wano awoke his true power and Gear 5th and all this stuff, and the real form of the gum fruit and all these things. But much more interestingly to me, it's also a bed is the bottom of a body of water, you know, any ocean type thing, which I think is super relevant with what exactly Blackbeard is. It's also an area where a large number of oysters, mussels, and other shellfish live, but it's also where a large amount of seaweed is found. And considering that I think Zoro is, you know, maybe a living moss or seaweed head, that might be important. But it's also a bed as any superficial earthwork or railroad, and can also be the layer of a surface, you know, like a deposit of ore, coal, and stuff, like making me think of ores and related to ores type word definitions. But to me, this is all kind of, you know, like I've been saying, waking up from kind of a bad dream maybe. Oda likes to crush and create dreams and all these things. The idea of, you know, kind of lambs being led to the slaughter, the skin zoo bed, you know, a place where, you know, animals and stuff, or pirates maybe, are getting led to be put on display or to be, you know, terminated. I think that is ultimately what this clue is leading to. And that ties into the next clue too, doing the Binks Sake, which actually is I think the biggest word clues we're going to see, but without the context from earlier in the video, a lot of it was not going to make sense if I just whipped out, you know, what Binks Sake translates to before we got to this whole idea of attraction and pull and all these things. Let's start on Binks Sake and see what those spaghetti letters turn into. And so backwards, we're going to skip Binks this time and come back to it. We'll start with Sake. So Sake backwards is Ikas. Now Ika, one, it sounds like Nika a little bit already, but in Swedish, Ika is a kind of small wooden rowing or sailing boat. It's also to echo or to yield an echo, so it makes me think of Brooks' dial tone with all the stuff, and all we just talked about with the boats and all those things. Ika can also mean one in many languages, but since its main meaning Ika is a ship, and part of these rules is if we're gonna do all this different stuff each level, we shouldn't have each one just mean the same exact clue every time. They should all work together to make something new. So let's just Tom Riddle the word Ikas into the Old English word ask, which I do think is one layer of this clue. Like I said, we're supposed to be asking questions. We're supposed to be questioning everything in this whole world. That's what almost maybe the point of life is to learn and to really be a part of it, you know, mind, body, and spirit. To me, it starts with asking questions and never being satisfied with just, you know, what some narrator or bad guy said about some situation. If your eyes and ears are telling you something different, follow that and see what happens. Now this ultimately isn't what the word is going to become, but we're going to leave it at ask for now and then go to see what Binks becomes this time. And now let's try a Tom Riddle Binks for once, and let's make it into sink. Now sink actually means to move or be moved into something. So this whole idea of being pushed towards something, all those things are incorporated here. It also sink means to drink something alcoholic usually. So this idea of maybe something being brewed for someone to drink as like a power, or something growing to maybe be drank as a power. And then sink actually used to be an old word sench, which meant to cause to sink. So, and it's either sench or it's senche, like teach, I'm not sure. Either way, it meant to cause to sink. So going back to what we have, looking at the word again, ultimately, I'm going to need that I from sink to make what the ask word becomes. So we're going to take the A from ask, and A's, U's, and V's, all those are very interchangeable. We're just going to flip the A upside down, put it in place of the I, and we get sunk. So this idea of sink and senche, meaning for something to be sunken, to cause something to sink, sunk, kind of was the old word. It wasn't impossible to use it like that. It has been used before as a term for like sunken. Makes me think of like sunken treasure type of stuff like that. Now after doing that, ask, but ask becomes ISKE, I-S-K-E, and that's actually Old Tartar for old and ancient. And it also relates to a Finnish word for ASKE. Now ASKE, the meaning of it used to be to strike or hit something, to perform an attacking maneuver, so it makes me think of all the things Luffy does. But in a sense of law enforcement, it meant to crack down strongly. It also meant to going back to what the start of this video with the tackle and the attraction and all that stuff, it meant to hit on or to flirt to someone romantically, to try to get someone to become interested in you for whatever reason. ASKE meant all those things. So we get a little ancient kingdom reference, and we get this idea of attraction and forcing attraction, almost like you're concocting a love potion is the idea I get from all this stuff. But then we're left with the B's. Now even 2 hours into explain everything, I'm sadly still not even close to the point that I can explain all the things with B's and D's and E's and all the hidden Blackbeard clues and hidden Shanks stuff and hidden Ben Beckman clues and a million other characters I haven't mentioned yet. All those type of clues in here. So for now, just take my word for it that we have uses for those two B's. But for right now, we're going to turn them in, like we did before, to a D. And in French, de is of. Moving around Binks Sake, Tom riddling it up, we get sunken of old. Obviously, all relating back to the idea of buried treasure. X marks the spot, the gold, the whatever the treasure is, being underneath something or above something. Whatever it is, the idea of it being hidden can count for sunken. The idea, all those things can account. But I think here it could also be relating to the ideas of old, like the ancient kingdom perhaps, or just the ideas of being a pirate or being free. Those type, living in a nationless society, those type of things being hunted down and squashed out in the One Piece world. And it's a lot to go into, but ultimately I think that Luffy might be helping out a lot more factions than the Straw Hat Alliance. Now I'm not saying he knows any of that. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that something like that I think is going on. But that's also, stuff like that is going on across the board on the One Piece world. Everything we've gone through in this video has just been about the Straw Hats and Brook being fished and someone doing the fishing. The entire One Piece universe is being fished. And that stretches out and transcends dimensions to us, because Oda is getting us to learn and research and devote all this attention and time and light to all of these things and concepts that he's taken and is using his platform and artistic ability and one of the greatest story minds of all time to take us on a journey through our own history and to get us to learn about the world. This idea of the sunken of old, like the buried treasure and spirits and wills of the past, reaching out and pulling and grabbing us in the story and out of the story, I think is exactly what Oda's going for. But this is going to end it for the word stuff here. So, let's move on. So what's it all mean? Where's it all going? Does any of this have anything to do with anything?
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either. I guess we learned not to do it again.
Yes, sir.
Now I know after watching a 2-hour video, you'd expect to find some concrete, clear answers at the end. And sadly for not sadly, I mean, I think this is one of the coolest things about One Piece, but even 2 hours in, we're not even 1% in starting to uncover the secrets of, the One Piece story. Maybe we're 2 or 3%. And there are a lot of things that I could tell you right now, and they would just make absolutely no sense. Like if I told you for the entire story to just
forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
would you understand, or would you act like Roger Rabbit? Or if I said something like, for Oda, his yellow brick road is blue.
Thanks. I needed that.
Would any of those things make sense at this point? I don't want to sound too crazy after you've all watched this video. Thank you very much, and please like and subscribe and share. My intention with this video was just to kind of, get the ball rolling for the channel, obviously, but also to kind of maybe start some conversations, like I said before, and just really kind of broaden our horizons about what exactly we think is going on in the story, or what's acceptable to talk about as far as theories and, headcanon or whatever. I could go on for more hours about Binks Sake and all the stuff going on here. I could go into the Stampede movie and talk about how Douglas Bullet has a tattoo that looks just like Brook on his arm. But what's more important is some of the shots where his hair changes color to green. Which actually reminds me, I meant to say earlier, I'm actually colorblind, but I've had confirmation from color experts, including my wife, that the colors used here are the same, around Brook's side effects, are the same colors he uses with his powers later on. Or I could go on with more panel story clues about how nothing Brook says seems to be true or makes sense, like when he talks about knowing the Gold Roger as a rookie, why does he know him as Gold Roger? His name wasn't changed for another 20 years. So, lots of things like that, but I'm hoping in 2 hours in, I'm kind of, at least, you'll show me enough mercy and, let me go on to the next topic, and take my word for this one. Now, there will be more videos on this one. There's a lot more to cover with this. This is just kind of a starting point, like I said, and really kind of just opening I'm hoping to open the floodgates on the One Piece community ideas and all that stuff. Now, for what exactly I think is going on here with Brook, I think each of the Straw Hat crew, I think each one represents a huge, major myth and fairy tale, and they have all these web connections and stuff, with trying to conquer and combine every myth and story. The oldest story that is known, I think, is what he's referencing here with Brook, and it's known as the Cosmic Hunt. Now, we know it today as just our constellations in the starry sky, but the Cosmic Hunt is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of stories, all the beginning stories around the world, telling stories about what they saw in the stars. And the One Piece world does not have stars. We are watching them every single page. We see them with the crew. We're pretty much witnessing Oda's great cosmic hunt, I think. I'm not trying to say anything bad. Cosmic hunt. And that was why I was really excited earlier with the Geppetto stuff in the logo, because ultimately, whenever we find out what the final version of the One Piece, what that is, it's when the story dies, so to say. All of the old Pinocchio stories deal with basically Pinocchio trying to get revenge and kill Geppetto. And that on every level is happening in the manga. Oda has taken it to the next level where the trees fight back. And even if you want to look at it on the base level of, at the end of the day, the One Piece manga is printed on paper. So if you were a forest god, you would want Oda to, not succeed with his story or get figured out or whatever it is to stop him from printing paper. I think that's one meta level. But on a story perspective, it is this idea of conquering and registering and plowing the One Piece world for the Polar Express. But I doubt that makes any sense right now. Or maybe it does. Leave a comment, get a pizza roll. But I think that Oda sets rules for the story that he just can't help it. He loves to bend them. But he has principles that he adheres to no matter what. And he has themes that he tries to establish and connect to throughout the story. I wanted to establish with this video that I think above all else, number one, it's always to ask questions and seek knowledge. I think that is what he's asking us to do. I think that another part of what he's doing is that he needs us to love our betrayers. And I think he's also playing around with that idea of, they know not what they do, and a lot of peoples are influenced and their actions might be, they can't help it. Who knows what is making them do whatever. Ultimately, it is Oda. Ultimately, I always love that headcanon word, because literally, I think that's what Oda does, is he shoots little cannonballs around the world and has them blow up in people's minds and do all sorts of tricks. And that's what the number 2 rule I kind of wanted to establish with this video is.
It's a trap!
Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for taking the time and trusting that this video might go somewhere. My name is Adam Jinrakai. You can find me Adam Jinrakai on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm on Discord. Thank you, and please, like I said, I'm gonna have some Liller videos come out hopefully these next 2 weeks, and then by the end of this break, have the final, or not final, but have the Fisher King video out, and then we'll really get started. Because I think as soon as the break comes back, we got 3 chapters, and it's entering the final world. So, thank you for watching. Goodbye.